ceiling, and SEBI also has simplified the procedural requirements. Now, the RBI report on the interdepartmental or interdivisional group report on the internationalization of the Indian rupee, in page 36 of that report, had actually quite elaborately mentioned the advantages and the areas to watch out for when India gets included in the global bond indices. Obviously, the investor base for India's Indian government bonds widens, and it will also, in a way, relieve the Indian financial institutions from having to be one of the biggest buyers or subscribers to Indian government bonds, and they can actually then lend that money for more productive purposes to private sector or the commercial sector or individuals, etc. So, and naturally, the financing of the current account deficit becomes that much easier, because it is by and large believed that these investors are long-term and patient investors, and they are not fickle or hot money flows. So these are all the stable passive flow. These are all the advantages that we all know about. But naturally, and there are various estimates, exceeding $20 billion, ranging from $20 to $26 billion would come in, and then overall, and then over time, it would steady. Naturally, it also increases, there are also challenges to keep in mind. It increases the sensitivity of domestic policy to external spillovers. We need to keep an eye on what foreign investors would be thinking, what will happen to bond yields, currency, etc. And sometimes during globally uncertain times, unrelated to Indian macro fundamentals, there could be volatility in the Indian bond market or in the currency because of the inclusion or the holding of foreigners or holding of Indian G-Sec by foreigners. That is something we need to be prepared for and prepare us, and also think about it accordingly. And naturally, therefore, fiscal and monetary policies need to be cognizant of the global perceptions and sensitivities. And there could be also potentially, I'm talking in the conceptual or theoretical framework, potential cost of sterilization and associated market operations will also have to be kept in mind because of global perceptions and sensitivities. But by and large, at this point, we welcome this development because the benefits of index inclusion appear to outweigh the concerns and challenges which other countries are also facing. And we need to also balance in the long term the portfolio or the foreign investor flows along with macroprudential considerations, because ultimately, while foreign investors are looking to invest in India for its macroeconomic policy stability, the very act of their investment interest should also not jeopardize the macro stability. So to that extent, macroprudential policies will also become critical down the road, if not now. Just as portfolio investors in equity markets in India have benefited over the last 30 years from their investment in Indian equities, even in dollar terms, on risk-adjusted basis, Indian equity market, if you look at the Morgan Stanley Capital Index, it has delivered positive returns on a risk-adjusted basis, better than the MSCI emerging market indices or even the all-country world index, etc. So similarly, we believe that long-term patient investors into Indian government securities will also benefit in terms of earning for themselves commensurate economic returns. These are my initial remarks, and the floor is open for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your remarks. Now, you may like to ask the questions. Kindly introduce yourself, because we don't have your questions on our phones. So anybody who has a question may please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sir, Prashant Sahu from Financial Express. I have one question about the settlement of the bonds. Will it be onshore or offshore, or is there any discussion how to take it forward?
I don't have the detail as yet. Maybe that is a question that can be posed to the RBI. Thank you.
Hi, sir. This is Sumit Chaturvedi from ET Now. So I would like to know what are the positives for the currency? Can you throw some light on that?
Well, naturally, there will be a tendency for the currency to appreciate, just as it happened between 2003 and 8 when capital inflows into India surged. And therefore, when there is a demand for investors to buy the Indian government bonds denominated in rupees, then naturally the demand for rupee will increase, and everything else being equal, naturally it will lead to a potential for rupees nominal appreciation. So that is both a positive and a challenge, because we have to make sure that the rupee stays competitive as well. So in that sense, there is a potential for currency appreciation when the index inclusion starts to happen and the demand from investors for Indian government securities starts to rise.
Thank you, sir. Next question. Anybody else has any other question?
Hi, sir. This is Vikas Doot from the Hindu. I just wanted to know, do you have any sense on whether this might make it cheaper for the government to borrow it to impact in the long run?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you very well. Could you please repeat the question?
So I wanted to ask if you expect any impact on the government's borrowing costs over time from this.
Yeah, everything else being equal, an additional or incremental source of demand should see the Indian government's borrowing costs come down. But the order of magnitude is something that is difficult to determine at this stage. I think those who are not speaking, can you please mute your lines? Can you
Kindly
please mute your
put your
lines?
Kindly put your mic on silent mode, please.
So to answer your question on the borrowing cost, yes, everything else being equal, an incremental source of demand should see a reduction in the bond yield. But at the same time, I think we need to be aware that it depends on other factors as well. And right now, already, if you look at it, the Indian 10-year Treasury bond yield has not risen despite the sharp run-up in the US government 10-year bond yield to 4.5%, so much so that the spread between the US 10-year Treasury and the Indian 10-year GSEC has come down well below 300 basis points. So I think the Indian bond market is already performing well, and the cost of capital in relative terms is already very reasonable. It might come down somewhat even further. Back to you.
The next question, please.
Tarun from Z Business. Hi, sir. Good evening, sir. Sir, some brokerage reports are saying it will impact on the rating agencies, sovereign rating agencies also, sir. So, brokerage reports are saying that they are expecting this decision will impact positive impact on the rating also. So, what's your take on this, sir?
I have no comments on that. I don't have to prejudge what they would do. It's up to them.
Next question, please. Anybody else has any other question?
Yes, this is Siddharth.
Siddharth, you are not audible.
Yeah, am I audible now? Siddharth
Yes,
from
now
Bloomberg.
we can hear you.
Sir, can you also elaborate again on the pitfalls, and you also gave some number on the possible infusion, some $26 billion or something. If you can elaborate.
What?
The kind of infusion that we expect post inclusion in the JP Morgan bond index.
I think that was the burden of my initial remarks, that it would be a source of financing for the current account deficit, and it is about patient money. It is about getting rewarded for taking a long-term exposure to the Indian macro fundamentals and the sound prospects that India has. And I didn't use the word pitfalls, by the way. I said there will be challenges in terms of the pressure on the currency to appreciate, and also sensitivity of domestic policies to external investors' preferences, and also sensitivity of domestic policies to external events. When external events create financial market volatility globally, it would impact our GSEC yields and currency, because these investors will be reacting to the impact of global developments on the rest of their portfolio, and they will take some decisions on either increasing or decreasing their exposure to the Indian market. These things are to be expected.
Anybody else?
Hi, sir. I'm Nikunj from Reuters. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to check whether there are expectations there's going to be more volatility in the market. So I believe this is going to be a graded approach. There'll be 1% inclusion every month from June 24th. So do you think that this volatility can be managed? And secondly, your thoughts on initially when there was this delay in our bonds being included in the indices, there was this disagreement on India not ready to provide those capital gains tax benefit. So I wanted to ask you how we've managed to convince them now, or is it that they just saw merit to include this?
So, I mean, the question on volatility is a hypothetical one. There is no need to assume it. And therefore, I really feel it is not necessary for me to answer that question. There is no need to assume there will be volatility. And if there is, we are used to handling volatility. Our central bank is very well experienced in managing currency and interest rate volatility. And as far as your question on whether India made any changes and adjustments to its tax policy, the answer is no. Back to Ms. Nanubashi.
Now we'll move to the next question, if any.
Hi, sir. This is Siddharth here from Money Control. Just wanted to check, you referenced the high FDI inflows in the early 2000s. In response to that, the government and the RBI had to introduce the market stabilization scheme to tackle the liquidity inflows, liquidity issues. Do you expect that, do you think the RBI's current tools, instruments are enough to manage any possible liquidity issues that may arise?
I reference the fact that capital inflows in that era were quite strong, and that led to nominal rupee appreciation. Now, as to what measures that the RBI would take to handle or respond to currency movements is something that RBI would decide in due course when the eventualities actually materialize. It is unnecessary to engage in speculation at this point.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions in this regard now?
So this annual inflow, you were expecting about $20 to $26 billion after this bond inclusion.
What is the question, please?
No, you had mentioned about inflow of $20 to $26 billion after the inclusion in the bond index. So is it per annum you are expecting?
Yes, these were not our expectations. These are some private sector expectations on an annual basis. Yeah.
Right.
So have you also done any estimation as to what would be the foreign inflow because of this? You cited JP Morgan and some private reports, but
we don't do such estimations.
If there is any more question, kindly go ahead.
Hi, sir. Kriti from Informist Media. Sir, the JP Morgan report specifies that Indian bonds have been ineligible for qualification in their emerging market narrow diversified series because we haven't given them tax concession. So is that something you would want to have? Also, given that you said that inclusion in JP Morgan's list shows India's macro strength, so given that FTSE Russell is also expected to come with their biannual review by the end of September, do you see inclusion there as well?
We don't want to speculate on the second question that you asked, and also about the JP Morgan narrow index at this point. We have no comments to offer on both these questions.
Please go ahead with the next question.
Sir, good afternoon. This is Bani Kinkar Patnaik from ET. Sir, my question is, while you were saying that this inclusion is a testimony of the growing confidence of global financial markets in the Indian economy, but will it also require us to make any changes in our, say, either macroeconomic or fiscal policies?
We have always followed policies that enhanced Indian macroeconomic stability, and especially in a difficult time like the pandemic, and subsequently our emphasis has been on maintaining macroeconomic stability, both fiscal and monetary, and in general in economic policies. And if we continue to stay that path, then obviously investors would be rewarded, and we would be doing that for our own benefit. We don't have to alter the course that we have taken successfully in the last 3 years or even last 8 years, wherein we kept the fiscal and monetary stability paramount. That would stand us in good stead even after the index inclusion.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions, please? Do we have any more questions? Sir, I think this has been a pretty comprehensive briefing, a lot of questions, and you have responded very well. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us a brief on this important development today. Thank you so much. And I thank all my journalist friends for having participated.
I will also thank all the participants for dialing in, and wish you all have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.